Welcome back. Our previous lesson was on the individual demand and the demand curve. Today we'll be tackling market demand. When we say market demand, it is the sum of quantity demanded by each person for each price. So in a market of about 20,000 people, market demand is the sum of each person's demand at each price. So for instance, if the price of a good is 2, the market demand is the quantity demanded by each individual at that price 2. If the price were to increase to 3, the market demand will be the sum of the quantity demanded by each individual at that price 3. Now, to draw a market demand curve, just like we did for the individual demand curve, let's consider a simple market with only 3 individuals. We have the price of apples here in this market. And in this first column, we have Abby's demand for apple. And then we have Rose's demand for apples and Seth's demand for apple. At price 5, Abby demands 1 apple, Rose will buy 2 apples, and Seth will buy 3 apples. At price 4, apples. At price 3, Abby buys 3 apples, buys 5 apples. At price 2, Abby buys 4 apples, Rose buys 5 apples, and Seth buys 6 apples. At price 1, Abby buys 5 apples, Rose buys 6 apples, and Seth buys 7 apples. So to get a total demand curve for each price, you have to sum the individual demand at each price. So let's go through this again. When price of apple was £5, Abby's demand was 1, Rose's demand was 2, and Seth's demand is 3. If you add these 3 individual demands, you get a total market demand for apple, which is 6 apples at price 5. When price reduced to 4, Abby increased her demand to 2, Rose increased her demand to 3, and Seth increased his demand to 4. The sum of these 3 individual demands is 9 apples at price 4. When price reduced further to 3, Abby increased her demand to 3, Rose increased her demand to 4, and Seth increased his demand to 5. The sum of which is 12 apples at price 3. When price reduced to 2, Abby increased demand to 4, Rose's demand is now 5, and Seth's demand is now 6. The sum is 15 apples at price 2. When price further decreased to 1, Abby's demand is 5, Rose's demand is 6, and Seth's demand is 7. The sum of which is 18 at price 1. So if you want to look at only the total market demand, at price 5, the total market demand is 6. When price reduced to 4, total market demand increased to 9. When price reduced to 3, total market demand increased to 12. When price reduced to 2, total market demand increased to 15. And when price reduced to 1, total market demand increased to 18. Now, to use this information to draw a market demand curve, we have the various prices on the vertical axis: 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. When price was 1, total market demand is 18, this point A here. When price increased to 2, total market demand reduced to 15. When price increased to 3, total market demand reduced to 12. When price increased to 4, total market demand decreased to 9. And when price is 5, total market demand is 6. Now this curve shows the relationship between the price of apple and the total market demand of apples. Some things to note about the market demand curve. The first thing to note is that it is downward sloping, which means that the total quantity demand is higher when the price is lower. We can see from this demand curve that as price increases, quantity demand reduces. And as price reduces, quantity demand increases. This shows a negative relationship between the price of a good and the demand of that good. Now that we have a general idea of how the market demand curve looks like, let's talk about movement along the demand curve. Now, when there are changes in price, which has nothing to do with other factors changing, or when only price changes, when nothing else is changing, causes movement along the demand curve. This is what we call a change in quantity demanded. Now, from this demand curve, we can see that when price is 4, quantity demand is 9. When price reduced to 2, quantity demand increased to 12. The movement from this point A to point B is what we call the movement along the demand curve. This simply means that the demand curve itself does not shift, but the quantity demand increases, moving us from a point on this demand curve to another point on this demand curve. The only thing that causes a movement along the demand curve is when the price of the good changes. If any other factor apart from the price of the good changes, we're no longer considering a movement along the demand curve. We are considering what we call a shift in the demand curve. And this is what we'll be discussing in our next lesson. So this is all we have for market demand. As I said, our next lesson will be on shifts in the demand curve. If you enjoyed today's lesson, consider subscribing. Thank you.